There you go. So intuition, disruption, innovation, don't these look like some wild children having a great time? And if you think about where we are right now with the pandemic, with global unemployment skyrocketing, with all of the challenges, I can't imagine what these girls are telling each other. Just cannot even figure it out. But you know, as I've been thinking about them in my practice, I've been looking for how do they relate and how do they help us? So I want to take a little time to share that with you today, to ask you some questions. I'm coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee in the United States. We did have tornadoes recently. Sometimes my power does go out. If it does, I'll hop right back on or get on my cell phone. So I just wanted to let you be prepared for that. So these girls are something else. Now I want to show you just a definition of intuition. That is an important one to understand. All of my life, I've been wrestling for, as the poet wrote, commitment, respect, and living nonconformity. And living in nonconformity means wrestling with how do I deal with having ability or insight or skill or gifting that doesn't fit other people's molds. And I know a lot of you may have some of the same challenges. If you look at intuition as a process by which information that we normally would say it's outside of the range of cognitive processes, it's sensed and perceived in the body as something that is either distant or yet about to happen. If you have children, take a moment and in your chat box, just type me a yes or a no or a Y or an N. How many of you have experienced knowing something was going on for your children when they weren't where you were physically? How many of you have experienced knowing something was going on with a child? Or let's broaden it, a loved one, your partner, your parents, when you were distant from them? Absolutely, yes. I see a few yeses keep coming. Yep, 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 yep. 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 And was that frightening or comforting? Good. Good. Yep. Good. Good. Depends. I like it. Frightening. Yep. Yep. Is he? Yep. Good. Both. Yep. You see, part of what's true about intuition and about change in general, and really all the work I do, whether I'm talking about change outright or whether I'm talking about trauma-informed and trauma-responsive processes, or whether I'm helping people with resilience and self-care, it's all about change. And it's always about the both and. Because to be able to have some sense of what might be going on distant geographically or yet to come can make you very frightened of what you're experiencing. It can, for some people, cause them to wonder if they're having a psychotic episode or something is wrong with them. And I want to assure you, first of all, absolutely nothing is wrong with you if you're dealing with intuition. You may need to practice the skill of learning to listen and sort out. And we'll talk about that and maybe do a few exercises with that today. But every spirituality has a sense of how we deal with the invisible in the visible world. And intuition is certainly a piece of that. We are nothing but energy turned into physical matter. Why would we possibly think that all we could perceive of is just the physical? And yet I will tell you, having had this challenge and gift since I was a very young child, learning how to sort out, how do I know if this is just me making something up or if this is a precognition of something to happen? And how does that fit with my current world if I'm always seeing things that are ahead of me or that are beside me? What do I do with this intuition and this intuitive process that I believe is given by the Creator for us to use in a way that benefits us? Not for parlor tricks, not to answer where's my Lulu's diamond ring, but who am I and how do I live in this world? If I get a strong leaning to turn left instead of right, what expectation do I put on that? Is the expectation that I'm going to see the outcome of the reason that I believe I might be supposed to turn left instead of right? Or am I simply turning left because I know it is the next step and I don't need to see the outcome to take action at the present? The now of that, what is I turn left instead of right. The so what is I was following my intuition. The now what, to go right on into the learning process, is I will see what the outcome looks like. And if I don't see it right now, I will wait to see it in the long run. I keep a journal. And in that journal, I write out the intuitive hints or glimpses that I have. And then I come back and I report on them to myself to see how they're doing. And it's amazing that over time, as I've practiced and practiced and practiced, I have a sense of comfort because I know that my intuition is almost always, if not in the now, in the present. Yes, Izzy, I tend to agree with you. Making the invisible visible is really what it's all about. And that's a huge challenge. So this whole piece of looking at what we experience and how we track it begins to be important. This is kind of a nice science-based process in terms of this definition. There have been a number of people who've looked at intuition, not only from a spiritual perspective, from a scientific perspective, looking at what is that field of energy. It used to be called n-dimensionality back in the 80s. How come some of us are like transmitters and receivers? How can we know and how can we make the invisible visible, given the fact that we live in these saggy sacks of flesh we call bodies? And yet our ancestors all across time have always had ways of knowing that are very important. I received a call this morning about sunup from one of my friends in the Navajo Nation who had a dream that she wanted me to talk with her about because it involved my shared family with her on the nation. And it was only because one of her ancestors told her in the dream to call me that she called. So we have this whole notion of how do we connect across all time and all space, and why would we not? So if we accept that this is a working definition of intuition, and we look at Albert Einstein, I thought I might have some hardcore science people that I needed to kind of build up and talk about who are the people that say this is important. And one was Albert Einstein. The only real valuable thing is intuition. Take a minute and think about that. Oh, yes, yes. Oh, yes, the power to yes. No, you're right. What I would love for you all to do is take just a moment and think about, turn inward and think about, why might intuition be the only real valuable thing? What might have caused Einstein to say that? What might have caused Einstein to say the only real valuable thing is intuition? Yes, 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 yes. His creative genius, perhaps because it's something you can act on it and make it real. It's the alchemy of all we learn and know, because no one can truly understand our inner thoughts, the invisible connections that might trip us up or offer opportunities. Yes. What else? Belief in oneself. Absolutely. We know more than we know that we know. Yes, absolutely. Think about Einstein. He was thinking in huge ideas, great, big, wild ideas. And he was thinking about things that no one else knew or believed in except him. Vulnerable instead of valuable. I'll take it. I'll take it vulnerable. Intuition is a very vulnerable thing, because I have to tell you, I live in the southern part of the United States, and we talk about, we should talk to God, we should talk to God, we should talk to God. But when God talks to us, we call it major mental illness. And there's something that's off about this. We must be able to think, oh yes, it speaks to the burden of brilliance. The aha moment, absolutely, yes. It's these tiny sparks, the what if or how might, that when we connect these to the physical world through the small inklings of ideas that we have, that we begin to see the possibility for real and profound change in different ways. I was working in my garden early this morning. I got up a little bit early. I needed a little bit of alone time and some major muscle activity. And I was digging and I kept finding these rocks, and I was getting angry because I kept finding so many stones in my soil. Now, there are a lot of metaphors for that. It could be my own life I'm talking about. But I had discovered a place where I have a drainage problem, and I thought, I need to do something big muscle. And I said, oh, I have a ditch that needs some rock in it. What if I line that ditch with the rock I'm finding? And so I moved the rocks and started making a pile. And then I thought, what if I make a little monument in that ditch to the running water and how it flows and how it always cleans everything, and how I'm diverting something that could be destructive to become something creative. And so, like you, Rosemary, my gut guided me to do something different this morning. That's a very simple example. And then I was watching, and I have a pair of nesting finches in one of my gutter hangers. And I saw the finches getting very agitated as I was coming near them. And I thought to myself, I wonder what might be helpful to these finches in the next few weeks as they raise their babies. I wonder how I can have access. How might I, here's the creative problem solving question, how might I have access to an area that I'll need to access at the same time respecting their need for who they are? How might I go into the nonconformity part of my life for that? And I decided that if I simply swung way wide to the left and came down the other side, I don't have to plant anything in those beds for the next few weeks. I can give them what I hope will be the blessing of raising their fledglings in peace and quiet. It's always about being willing to listen. And if there's one thing that Einstein taught me, it was how to listen. Shift course your gut, and gut is a piece of intuition that's important. So as we go forward, Rumi, the great poet, said, there's a voice that doesn't use words. Listen. When you have an intuitive response, and Rosemary, we see yours, we know it's the gut. Where do you feel it in your body? And I'm going to type that. Where do you feel intuitive urges in your body? Hope I got the spelling right. There you go. Where do you feel them? What's your physical experience? Your tummy? Yes. Yes. Your chest? Yes. What else? Does anybody begin to tremble? In some cultures, that's very important. The hand trembling is one of the prophetic utterance processes, the tingling feeling. Yes, Hortense, I have that one myself. Now, those of you who feel something in your chest, if anybody does, your heart, have you noticed that there's a difference between urgency to speak because you have something to say that comes from your head? Orgasmic, yes, I'll take that. As opposed to when you have something coming through your heart, the thumping is different. And when I heard you talking about how it's okay, the person places their hand on their heart in the Three Idiots and says, it's all right, heart. If you go out and look at Heart Math, HeartMath. By the way, they offer free subscriptions right now because of the virus, the pandemic. Heart Math teaches you to talk to your heart in a different way. And Heart Math is the source of some of the quotes that I'm using on intuition, because their work in getting us to talk to our heart and to listen to our heart and to manage our heart, not manage it in the thumb sense, but manage it in terms of learning to be in conversation with it and to collaborate with it. These are very important tools that we have for strengthening our intuition and for strengthening our positive responses that make us real resilient. Oh, yes. That's almost Kundalini, Izzy. Almost the Kundalini yoga awakening. Yes. That's the one that always gets me, and I feel like it's like a brain fire, a true brainstorm in a good way, and that's a wonderful thing. So, anybody else? How do you, the voice that doesn't use words? How do you experience that? And it may or may not be the same answers you've just given. There may be something different. I remember being in a really tough spot back in 1981. Dreams, yes, absolutely. And I was walking down the street pretty sure that the world as I knew it had come to an end. And I had the experience of not hearing a voice audibly, but of experiencing a voice. Yes, 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 there too, absolutely. Unless we play the role out of your ovaries, it's for nothing. Yes, boy, that is absolutely right. That root chakra, that energy way down there that we pull up is amazing. Now, when you think about spirituality, you may see people entering trance states to access intuition. The shamanic processes, the curanderos, the hatatlis, all the traditions that are indigenous, where we see people doing activities or processes that get them literally out of this reality. Yes, Hortense, that's what I was talking about with that chest thumping thing. It makes a difference. Feeling that comes with mental pictures. You all are a very intuitive bunch. You're a very intuitive bunch. Yes, Michael, I am right with you. If that monkey mind of mine starts to go, I just have to ask it to please hang on and be silent, because silence is where we find so much of our creativity, and it's something we haven't had much of until recently. Have you listened recently? What does it sound like where you are right now? Take a moment and just listen. I was hearing one bell. Now I hear the 3 temple bells separately. There's a mockingbird. That mockingbird starts as soon as the day gets up. A mockingbird is a bird. It's a feisty little thing, and it imitates all of the other birds. He starts at 6 o'clock in the morning, sometimes 5 o'clock on the east end of my house. And he walks the ridge on my roof, and he sings his heart out all day long. I think he's lonely, but I hear him. But I hear almost nothing else. There's a silent hum in the background that is traffic on the interstate, I'm sure. But when we stop and truly listen, now I like the way you talk about that, Noella. If the genitalia is the letting go center, would he trade an orgasm for potential pain? You might well. I've never seen a butterfly that came out of a cocoon looking like it wanted to go back in again, or a baby that's born that wants to go back in again. So you just kind of got to temper that. I love the wide open thinking. Now, we've already talked about a little bit of this, but here's some things that you do to foster intuition. When you were talking about things people do in the practical moment, I think the bathroom is the most underrated place in the world. Now, I live alone, so I have a cat. I have not had time in my bathroom alone since I had a cat. But those of you who have children and partners, one of the things that's almost sacred is bathroom time, as long as you don't hog it when somebody else really has to go. It's a great place for solitude. So is the garden. Where can you have time for solitude and silence? My Muse neurosensing headband helps me with this. It shows me literally what my brain is doing when I'm meditating. I thought I was meditating before, but apparently there was a lot of chatter going on because my brain waves are now much slower and more regular. And that's really critical. And it's a simple tool. In fact, I've got it out because I used it this morning, just like this. A little headband that you put on, and you can see, I'll turn it around for you. And it has sensor strips, so you get like an EEG reading of your brain activity on your phone as you're working. Muse, the neurosensing headband, is a great tool for helping you do what you think you're doing. Observing everything. How many of you all have stopped and opened your eyes and taken in everything you can with your eyes? The little ant crawling on the grass, the spider spinning her web going chick, 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 which if you are quiet enough, and it is quiet enough around you, you may be able to hear. How many of you listen and watch and see and notice how many greens there are in the spring and how many fall colors there are in the fall? To take in so much of what, it's like, that's really orgasmic to me. It's like the color explosion when I go out and I look in my yard and I see all the weeds I really want to despise. And then I notice that the birds are eating their seeds. And that's food for the birds. How can I hate the weeds and love the birds? But observing everything, becoming a keen observer, opening your eyes out this way, which is a tremendous gift to listen to and with your body. Now, most of us don't live in our bodies very well. And I have to say, on a day like today, when we've all been sitting so long, probably if we could listen to our bum, it might well be silent because it's probably gone to sleep by now. Nonetheless, we can listen to our feet, and what are they telling us? Our whole body. listening with your body. How does the air feel against your skin? How do your clothes feel as they touch your flesh? Where are you being constrained or constricted and bound up? Connecting deeply, paying attention to all of these things we've talked about. But here's the one thing I want to share with you about this. When I was learning to fine tune my intuition so that I didn't feel overwhelmed by all of the information I was getting, and I began to keep a journal of the intuitive hits, as I call them, that I was getting, and track how did they turn out. I had to use, and it became apparent to me that hindsight's really important here. Differentiating when my monkey mind is doing random thoughts and feelings versus when my intuition is kicking in can only really be resolved using hindsight. You have to look backwards at the experiences. And out of that learning to look backwards and forwards at the same time and learning to live in the present, I came to what is my biggest nugget for you today, in some ways. As far as I have come, I will always have that far to go again. I'm always in the middle of it. And out of that, I live in this fabulous soup that allows me to be very creative and do what I am in some ways most known for, which is to actually mix ideas that people don't think about mixing and see what happens to them. Some of the most creative ideas I've had have come out of mixing things from manufacturing, like total productive maintenance, with supply demand issues in human services, which is really kind of fun. Now, it might be intuition or it might not be. The sign you've been looking for, it may not really be the sign you're looking for. It is a sign nonetheless. The fly on the wall doesn't always have big meaning. Sometimes it means I just left the door wide open. I've got a fly in here that's about the size, it's about the size of a soccer ball, I think, and I'm waiting to give that fly the opportunity to leave. So always remember, this is a sign you've been looking for, or maybe not. Suspend your expectations and your judgments and see what is, because unless you're in active decision-making mode, you can afford to let yourself float freely and be that nonconformist. I want to point out a couple of differences between what I call European and Western values and indigenous values that are all over the world. I'm so blessed, and I mean that in the biggest way possible. I get to hang out with traditional Navajo, traditional Hawaiian folks. I just spent some time in Japan helping them craft their model of trauma-informed care, and that was hanging out with people who were traditional Japanese as well as academics. There is such a huge difference. Most indigenous values focus on community over individual, the we over me piece. Many indigenous communities focus on collaboration and cooperation rather than competition, unless it's a designated spot and place for competition. Most of these communities also focus on the present as being most important. One of the challenges we face in some indigenous communities is how to prepare for retirement and savings if you are simply living in the now. If I'm jiggling, the cat's scratching, sorry. Life with a cat, it's a great thing. So the values that we live with in terms of becoming westernized that take us away from a tribal, community, village-oriented lifestyle to an individualistic, kind of more egocentric, self-focused style may not be the healthiest ones for us. When I look at what we call modern mental health and what being healthy is, it's not about competition, and it's not about one up, one down. It's not about I'm right and you're wrong. It's about collaboration and cooperation. So I'm asking you to also consider how intuition and disruption and innovation, how you can use the collaborative values in that. So let's move forward and get to that next sister. So this intuition sister, she sits around and she dreams a lot. Disruption is the next thing we're talking about. And this sister is a little bit explosive sometimes. She can really toss things up. There is a whole theory of disruption, and I'm talking about disruption in terms of personal changes and the theory of disruption, because they both start with the same word. And when we look at disruption, this little girl, I'm pretty sure she's going to be tearing it up. Any problem or disturbance that interrupts an event, activity, or process. What disruptions are you facing right now? The cat's a sign. The cat's a sign. I'm sure she'd love that. And she is a sign. Please do post your questions. I'd love to answer them. So let me talk about, I've hit the wrong key. I'm so sorry. I've got a little bit of a challenge here with my question and answers. There we go, to get them to go off. So let's talk a little virus called COVID, quite disruptive, yes. So tell me what it's disrupting, Hortense. Yeah, it's what's it changed? What's different now? And I'm asking for the nitty-gritty details. Physical connections, yes. We can no longer touch each other. I can do this and put my hand up, and you can put your hand up, and we might be able to perceive. Izzy, give me your hand. Can you feel me? It's interesting. I felt your hand as you approached me. Did you feel mine? So we don't even really require the physical contact if we're willing to recognize that all we are is energy, business, human relation, commotion. Yes, commotion. I spend my day sitting in front of the laptop. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be the perfect shape of a Herman Miller Aeron chair. Yeah, so all y'all, reach up and touch somebody. Reach up, put your hands up, reach up and touch somebody. If you've got your camera on, it's a whole lot easier. Or if you wish to touch my hand, I'm here. I'm your conduit today. You can do this at home. Yes. Hello, my sister. I feel you. Feel it? That energetic connection is absolutely there, even when we are distant from each other. And this, I believe, to be the conduit for the intuition that we have. I know, Pauline pops into my heart and my head periodically, and I know in my way to simply pray for her. You can do this. If you have a pet, try petting your pet, like if your cat's down at the bottom of the screen, try petting your pet a few inches above the pet. Yes, Hortense. And see if they are actually, if you'll notice that they will pick up on it as well. So the disruption is, we tend to believe that we can only be in each other's physical presence to do our business, and we can actually be absent from each other and do just as much. But it requires this whole disruptive piece of COVID that we be willing to listen to our intuition and do things differently. Now let's go forward and see where we were with that. Here are some disruptions in business that we face on a regular basis. And here's what disruption in business is about. If you think about it, disruption in business, the disruption theory relates to these smaller companies with fewer resources, like Alchemy Inspiration, that successfully challenged the established businesses. You have a vision, but the key that it requires in terms of creating disruption in business is recognizing that every established business overlooks some area to favor others. We have customers. We get comfortable with our customers. They tell us what we want. We build what they want. And we are looking at that large sector of our market that brings us revenue on a regular basis. And guess what? We are probably overlooking less demanding customers who represent disruption and a need that we could fulfill. For example, what happened to Zoom last month? Zoom went from 10 million to 200 million users in 1 month, because all of the established businesses had overlooked the need that we were going to have, the absolute ability to contact each other virtually. And of course, it exposed all the challenges that Zoom had, which they're rapidly fixing. Everybody wants me to consider using other tools, but this is the only one in the Zoom meeting app where we have breakouts and polls and all the interactivity that I really crave. So if you have a business, even if you're a small business, look at what you are favoring and what you might be missing. I realized, for example, that there was a gap in the learning industry of people who are doing evidence-informed learning. That is not only the evidence about the content, but the evidence that we have about how people learn. And so that was a niche I focused on for many years. I noticed as I was dealing with change management, everybody had all these great organizational theories, but no one had backed that up to look at what happens to the individual during change. And what does the individual need to be able to fit in and participate in the organizational process? And everybody was teaching change from a grief-based perspective instead of a choice-based perspective. So what you're doing in all of this thinking in business, in your businesses, is you are turning non-consumers into consumers. Let's see what's happening in chat. It's going off. Yep, got it. Absolutely. Liking the yelling director. I love it. That works for me. So your challenge, if you are in business, is to turn your non-consumers into consumers by identifying the things that you can offer them, the areas that you're not tending to. And I find that solitude, that silence, that listening with my whole body, that getting out of the usual very left-brained processes that we sometimes live in is required. Sometimes trance dancing, sometimes walking a labyrinth, sometimes drumming, sometimes chanting, sometimes doing the things that are important, sometimes going out and burying my face in the herbs that I grow. And that brings us to the third one, who is innovation. This third sister, now disruption, she's a little pistol. I think in this image, she's probably the upper left. They're all innovators. But innovation is its own thing in a sense. Innovation can't come when we're in the way of our own thinking and our own creativity, when we're unwilling or unable to ask the questions of how, might, and what if. When we're missing a larger body of knowledge. One of the lovely things about being a multidisciplinarian is I get to pull things from psychiatry and psychology and sociology and education. And this is the kind of innovation that gained me a position in psychiatry at Georgetown University Medical Center with only a master's degree, because I was non-conforming. So for those of you in Africa, I want to say to you, relish and cherish your nonconformity. Do not break your bones to fit in someone else's body, because that's not going to get you where you need to go in the long run. Colonization as a factor in human creativity is huge, because when you have people that colonize, whether it's people who believe they're healthy, colonizing people they believe to be ill, whether it is people who are liberal colonizing conservatives or vice versa, whether it is a nation building other nations by claiming land and requiring people to think in ways that the colonizer thinks, that is all stifling to innovation and creativity. It can be for some a construct that is helpful, but often it is not, because it says something about you is not okay. Now, there are some great examples of innovation that we see from countries like Africa, where, again, I reject the reductionistic labels of third world and first world. We are simply all one world. And if you have seen any of the images of the planet as we go through COVID, wow, wow, wow. You can see that we need to have innovation of all sorts. The ability and the work that people are doing, making different kinds of masks, coming up with ways to keep each other entertained, finding different ways to solve problems. This fellow used a zero pot. The zero pot's a very simple, old construct. Now, he's in Africa. I've seen these used in the Zuni and the Hopi Nation, and I've seen them used in Hawaii, where you have a pot and a pot, and you pack between the two pots sand, and you really wet it down, and you put a cloth on top of the second smaller pot that contains your produce, and it keeps it quite cool for some period of time. What would be the impact of places that have limited electricity having zero pots? What would happen? Use your chat box. Food security, absolutely, Isabel. And food is a big issue. We here in Nashville, there's no toilet paper. Less wastage, absolutely. What else? Preservation, more energy efficient. Ability to transport food to other locales, that's absolutely right. All of these are great, great examples and great responses. Looking at freedom, looking at nice decor. Imagine if you didn't have to be dependent on electricity, which someone else is going to want to sell you to be able to keep your food cool. In the market where the picture on the bottom is from, these pots cost $2. The vendors that you see reported that they were increasing their revenue by 25 to 30% just using these pots. Abundance beckons. Who was hurt by creating these pots and by marketing them? Was anyone hurt?
Your microphone?
So you see, you're looking for the electricity companies, that's correct. And they are hurt by this. But here's one of the challenges we have about being environmentally responsible. If we become sustainable, we reduce jobs in one area. And if we come from a scarcity perspective, then we live with the fact that there's not enough for everybody. When we come from the perspective of there's plenty, there's enough for everyone, we can make this work and we can bring other people to the table instead of building a fence around it. Suddenly you see that there's a great shift in how we think and in the ways that we work and in our heart. And it is the heart, after all, that we have to figure out how to resolve. And it's one of the things that intuition helps us do. This young man, who knows what this story is about? Abundance mindset is a rising tide that lifts all boats. What do you think's going on here? Anybody know? Anybody see this image before? Yes, William Kamkwamba, making electricity using a bicycle. Got tired because the electricity went on all the time. Used the constraint of wanting to see his Christmas tree lights and of wanting electricity and the parts he had on hand to build a windmill. Now, if that's not using his intuition to listen to what might work, what might I have that will allow me to do this? How might I use what I have to do this? I don't know what is. He had intuition, disruption, the electric failed, innovation, his windmill. The constraints that we have with disruption really do open us up to innovation. I think one of the things that's so popular here, certainly these escape games, yes, it's the guy who brought electricity to his village. And there are many more people doing this. There's now a movement of people who are putting small, not generators, I forget what they're called, devices on their bicycles that they're using to generate electricity for like sharpening knives, for running cell phones. I have a colleague here in the States who's using bucket seats from cafeterias and gears to make a whole new kind of wheelchair that can go over rough ground and can be used to harness a buggy or a cart too, that children are using in India and other places to help them have much more mobility, because it's a hand cycle that only requires 20% of the use of one's hands. Why is this so important? Oh, I'm so sorry, Noella. Let's see. Thank you. Yes. And when you look at what he's done, he has done something totally disruptive. He had an intuition that wheelchairs, that he could do something besides a chair with wheels on it. And by lowering the center of gravity, making a tricycle using a weight shifting directional change, he was able to create something that everybody could use. And he's taught individual youth how to repair these. So he's kind of walked away and left the project on its own once he set it up and got it going. Intuition combined with constraints through disruption, combined with innovation, gives us a power that we cannot possibly estimate the value of. So we're about due to start doing questions here in just a few minutes. I'm looking forward to seeing a few more come up in the box. Yep, I will indeed answer them all, unless it's about your Aunt Lulu's diamond ring. This fella has created a refrigerator made out of clay. Again, it uses a separate chamber with water cooling. You can see the lid on the top. These midi cools are great, and they are being manufactured by hand. I suspect there's probably now some process going into it in terms of clay slab construction. But again, it does the same thing. Can you imagine what it would be like to be able to keep your food cooler? You would have to go to market less. You would be able to feed more people. And this is a fabulous thing. Again, at some point, he may have thought about, I know I thought when I saw both the Zier jar and this, I remember as a child in rural Western North Carolina, we would put jugs of things, we'd bury them in the creek, it's tightly sealed, of course, so that the creek could cool them. And all that's been done here is taking that and putting it in, making one's own water supply around the box or between the jugs. Now here's the next one. What's this billboard about? Well, this billboard is another example of innovation. In Peru, where it is humid on the ground but dry in the air, you take the university came up with a billboard that collects water. It uses condensation, and it collects something like 90 liters a day. And it's an absolutely amazing piece of work, because this could allow people in desert areas to collect water that they desperately need. Again, born of someone had an idea that if we use evaporative cooling in one way, we could maybe transform it to use it in another way. They can scale, I think, Andrew, that's a great question. What do you all think? How can we scale ideas like this? What role might microlending play? And do they need to scale? What happens when they scale? If they scale, what happens to ideas? Got a keyboard lag. What might happen? Let's make that a question, possibility. What might happen to ideas when they scale? What can get in the way? What can benefit? Yes, ideas become corporations, which is not always good. They flourish, they get cheaper, some of them fail. The most important thing that they do, I think, ideas is like this, is they give us hope that things can be done. If you can build a billboard that uses condensation to gather 90 liters of water a day, can you build a smaller one that might provide something smaller for a family? Ideas don't always have to become corporations. Ideas can become collaboratives, coalitions, consortiums, but they can get hijacked or diluted. See, here we go into what we often go into, which is the fear-based perspective, because we don't really know much about the human process of forming effective and functional collaboratives where people can actually come together and do something for the good of all rather than the benefit of only one. And that's a challenge. Does that mean we should not innovate? Absolutely not. That means we should absolutely take a look at how we can do it differently. If we are coming from the collaborative community, we over me mindset, and that's a huge thing. So here we go. Cultural sensitivity, that is absolutely the key. When you have nothing, anything is possible. This soccer ball is made out of plastic bags. I don't know that we'll ever put a dent in the soccer ball companies, but when youth come together and find ways to create something like this, plastic bags knotted up with twine to make a soccer ball, there's so much more to this than just a soccer ball. The intuition was, I want to play soccer. I wonder what I could do. And here's the result. You can hold the string and kick it. You can tuck the string in the middle. I want you to think about the largest social example of this that I can think of, which is when the United States bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They were reduced to nothing. That was such a significant emotional experience that they could rebuild into anything they chose to become. Significant emotional experiences like pandemics, like social isolation or physical distancing and social connection, can give us ideas. We still have too much to see how much is really possible, perhaps. So creation and innovation, these all really do require these three sisters, and I hope you'll befriend them and learn to love them. Sometimes they might act like three idiots, but they're still good girls. Now, I was going to do this activity, and I've kind of worked my way around it. This is something in the slides I encourage you to play with at home with your folks there, because this really does get your creativity going. It's adapted from a team activity I've done. It's the future. There's a lot of salmonella in eggs, and you don't want to touch them anymore. They got to get to the store. And so this particular activity asks you to take things that don't usually go together, straws, which you can use plastic, you can use bamboo strips, you can use twigs. And this is a great activity with kids, but you're going to want some newspaper. How might you create an egg carrier that keeps your egg safe using only these items? These are your constraints. You only have string, and you only have a piece of twine and some straws, a paper bag, and maybe 2 eggs. And you can turn a team loose to work on this, and you can watch them do it, and suddenly you'll find that there are all the typical group dynamics going on. I think I have a short in my mouse. It's doing things, and I promise you I'm not touching it. That will show you where your group dynamics and your team development really are. You can see how people deal with change and constraint, which will inform you about communication you need to work with. If you do something like this with yourself, you'll find out where your frustration is and how easily you get kind of stopped and stumped with stuff. Oh, yes, the mouse. Oh, we have a mouse. The mouse is a sign. I'm sure it's a sign. The mouse and the cat. So I'm looking for questions from you all. Here's another challenge that will help you, that we've already talked about a little bit, how you can actually see how intuition, we talked about your relationship to it in the beginning. We talked about how intuition has helped disruption when you saw the examples of the bicycle for the windmill and the Zerpot and the refrigerator and the soccer ball. Constraints help us. If you think about Nelson Mandela, some of his most powerful work was done when he was in prison dealing with the constraint of confinement. The challenge is, how do we choose to think about it? Now, what I want to do is I want to turn this over to talk about questions and answer your questions. I don't see any questions yet, but here I am, and here you are, and here we go. How may I be of service to you today? It's late in the day, and I know that you are all weary, and you've done a fabulous job of sticking with us, but how may I be of service to you today? Q&As. I wonder what we can learn from our dreams. That's a great question, Andrew. Dreams are symbolic and sometimes literal. You can study dreams for a really long time. Oh, yes, I will be glad to speak to that, Mark. Let me finish answering Andrew's question. They can give us a lot of information, our dreams do, that tell us where we are frightened, where we are hopeful. Sometimes I have 3 dreams at once going in tracks on top of each other. Sound, color, smell even in the dreams, which is really an interesting thing. But they tell us so much about where we are. You will learn as you follow your dreams. If you think about the dreams and write them down every day, you'll see what the symbols mean in your world, which may not be the same in other people's worlds. When I have a problem, oftentimes, or something I'm trying to solve, it may not be problematic, I will ask myself, I will say, self, and I usually put my hand on my heart, I'm going to bed now. I would love if you will help me out through a dream that gives me an answer to this problem. And almost always I get an answer that is useful or leads me to the next step. Now, let's talk about change from the grief perspective. I believe that's correct. Can I speak into change for the choice perspective? I'll tell a story. I was listening to W. Edward Demings back in 1992 in Atlanta, Georgia, and he was talking about change, and that statistical process control and total quality management was all about change. And he brought an expert, a psychiatrist from another city, up to talk about grief and change. And the psychiatrist got up and he said, there's nothing you can do about change except grieve it. All you can do is grieve it, because there are all these losses. And I thought, I'm just not going to stand for that. I've got to speak to this man. And so I said to him, sir, you came from a different city, is that correct? He said, yes. I said, and did you fly? He said, yes. I said, how many flights were there from your city, let's say Chicago to Atlanta? He said, about 45, and you picked one. Why did you pick the one you picked? It was shorter, it had a lower price, and I could get a better seat. I said, so you made choices. Change in the grief perspective, if you adopt his perspective, then all you can do in any change, like the pandemic, like a job loss or a job acquisition or a breakup or a marriage or an adoption or any change, all you can do is grieve the losses. In a linear process, we tend to grieve because we go A, B, stop. A, B, stop. We go from the beginning to the end, we stop, we have loss. That's not how life really is. You know, I was talking about my garden and the seeds and the birds. The seeds feed the birds, which feed the plants, which have the babies, which help the insects, which control. It's all spirals. And so when I look at the seeds and the insects and the birds, I talked about the finch and how the finch is trying to have babies. There's the finch back to the seeds, back to the insects. The finches eat mosquitoes. Everything is really spirals that intersect rather than these straight line stop-start things. So if you think about it, these are all critical things that we focus on. When you look at change from or grief from a Western linear perspective, you've set yourself up for so much more sadness. And that standard perspective on grief of anger, despair, oh gosh, I've forgotten the 4 things of grief that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talked about. Denial, anger, despair, and resolution. When you look at those, if we spend our times doing A, B, stop, and we grieve what comes after that, we spend a lot of time in denial, despair, anger, and resolution. When we spend our time looking at grief through a change-based process or a spiral process, we can see that this conference, when it ends, I will be sad. It will lead to other things. We will send it out and other people will see it, and there's another spiral starting. And that spiral will intersect with another spiral. So it's really very much not only a 3, but a 4-dimensional process. And that, for me personally, is much richer. What else?
Elizabeth, there are questions in the Q&A. Can you see them?
Yes, I can see them, and I have been responding to them, talking to change for the grief perspective. No questions.
So the other box Q&A, there's one question from
I apologize. My error.
No problem.
Thank you, Mark. Oh, yes, of course. I have Hortense. This is one of the things that I think is so challenging to us Western thinking people. We don't think about the Dogon. We don't think about the Polynesians. We don't think about the folks who are doing complex mathematics, astronomy, road building, major agricultural centers, devising and creating and innovating. We think that we're the only ones. And yes, all of the people who have done things like this, but these folks were amazing. To discover the Sirius constellation with their bare eye took going in and listening, took listening to all that is out there to find out what might this be and how might we think about it. Oh my goodness, how do we teach our kids to be more intuitive, disruptive, and innovative? You have to welcome a lot of messes. You have to welcome a lot of messes. You have to give them some constraint when they're playing so that they actually can have the opportunity to challenge the limits that they have. And while I love technology, children often learn more when they are allowed to go outside, play with sticks and leaves and flowers, or even robotics. If you have any kits that will require them to put things together, especially those kits that require them to have them options about how they can put things together. So instead of finding out what's the wrong way to do it, there are 5 right ways to do it to get you to your different outcome. I sometimes think that some of the science kits you can buy online are great. Having children learn how to cook. I wonder what might happen if we added chocolate powder to this. I'm making a bread. I wonder what might happen, I said to one of my friends who was visiting, if I added chocolate and cherries to this bread. Always asking them, I wonder what might happen if, or how might we, using those questions. As Izzy said, using what, so what, now what, and then what, is a great way. You can, when you look at the fact that it's a natural job of children to be curious, they have great intuition until we teach it out of them. Recognize that you need constraints to become innovative. These are things you can do.
I absolutely love your answer. Love your answer, Elizabeth. You must write that down. We have to allow a lot of messes.
Yes, I will. Don't worry. I'll do that and type it for you.
Time for maybe one more question from anyone.
Yes. I wonder what we might learn from the Dogon people of Mali.
So maybe just that question for everyone who might not have seen it. Hortense was asking about intuition and indigenous societies. And he was asking Elizabeth, have you looked into the doggone people of Mali who discovered the Sirius constellation centuries ago with their bare eye? And that's what she was talking about.
Yes. You might find some of the books about the new physics that blend with indigenous thinking are really interesting. Blackfoot Physics, like water and Patrice Valadolme-Some's work are all fabulous works. I want to thank you all so much for letting me be here today and for inviting me. I'm Elizabeth Power. I'm called the Queen of All Things Change. I love to help people work at individual hope-boosting, soul-calming sessions, and I love to help people learn. I look forward to hearing from all of you in the future.
Elizabeth, you are simply powerful. I am so blessed and so grateful to see you again and to hear you again. And you've aged backwards. You look